Welcome back to the Alone Together podcast where the loners are never alone. I'm Journey.
And I'm Layla.
And today we are going to get a little personal and talk about anxiety because it's Mental Health Awareness Month. It's only right. We've been wanting to do this episode literally since we started the podcast, but it's just never really been like the time. And I feel like now's the time because we both really can like say some stuff because we've gone through it enough. We've experienced it enough. We finally kind of found what works for us. So yes, in honor of this month in mental health, we are going to really talk about mental health.
Yes. So, first, I want to start off by explaining what anxiety is. So, anxiety is when you have a fear response in your brain and it sends you into fight or flight mode, but there is no imminent danger. And a lot of times, this manifests as like overthinking, a panic attack, just having an anxiety attack, but it also manifests in very different ways. Like phobias are considered anxiety. The flashbacks and nightmares that you have during PTSD are considered anxiety. And then there's generalized anxiety disorder, things like test anxiety, social anxiety. So it's different for everybody, but overall it just means that the part of your brain, your ventromedial prefrontal cortex and your hippocampus, which both hold it together, your fight or flight mode and the amygdala, they're dysregulated and it just keeps sending you in this feedback loop. So 16% of people experience anxiety disorders. So this is a real disease that many people have. And I like to think of it as like an important disease as you would diabetes. Like it can manifest in real physical ways in your body. And it's something that needs treatment and needs more attention, I think.
I also want to say when we say disease, it's not to say like something's wrong with you, you're sickly, like
Yeah.
but anxiety is a disease because like you said, it manifests and it can grow worse if it's not treated, if it's not adhered to. And that's why people just I feel constantly live in a state of like worrying and anxiety and an anxious feeling because they don't see it as a crisis, but it kind of is one.
Yeah.
And it really can be like life hindering. Like I know when I first started to experience anxiety, like it was the stereotypical, well, I was also going through like a depressive mode at the same time when I first started to experience anxiety, but it definitely did manifest in like the stereotypical ways, like social withdrawing, like not wanting to go out, just total shift in behavior because I had never experienced anxiety before. I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
I was having anxiety attacks in the middle of class and I didn't know what it was. I still don't know why I was having them to this day in the middle of class in a lecture, but they were happening. And once I found out what they were, it was just like, how do I get over this? And for me, the only way was therapy personally, but not everybody in the Black community has that, which is why I think, we should start to advocate more for like breath work and like meditation and yoga as a whole, not just doing poses, but the foundation of yoga and just learning to recenter because sometimes anxiety like is just like a outer body experience because when your mind is racing, it's just going and it's like who's even in control anymore? It's like living on autopilot sometimes I feel like with anxiety, but it doesn't have to be that way. It's very like curable in my opinion. It just takes work.
Yeah. It's definitely something that you have to find what helps you. And I think, especially for African Americans, you really have to find different methods of healing because when you look at different like cultures, they have healing as a part of their culture, like spirituality and healing and ways to calm yourself down. Like this is a part of their culture, but since we don't have that foundation, we have to really make our own healing and find our own ways of healing and things like yoga and breath work. I think it's all stuff that can be incorporated into our culture, and you definitely have to find what works for you. But I think for me, like seeing people that look like me doing that stuff and having a community around it has definitely helped me and given me motivation. Therapy definitely helped with my anxiety as well. But I think yoga was shockingly one of the most helpful things. I think it draws together your breath work and body work, and anxiety is something that truly can take over your body. Like when I'm having a panic attack, I feel like I'm not in control of my body
Yeah.
because you're not in control of your breathing, and that's such
Yeah.
a huge thing.
That
And
is your
every
body.
time I have a panic attack, like I just try so hard to focus on taking deep breaths and slowing down. And doing breath work and meditation daily is like practice for that. It's like practice for when you have a panic attack. Because for me, they don't happen like due to something. I just feel like it happens randomly. And so just preparing for that through breath work has really helped me.
Yeah. In all my like stress management and yoga classes I've taken, but at school, but mainly this one I took this last semester. Like obviously she had to relate yoga back to like science. So we read like countless articles on how much yoga helps anxiety. And it's exactly what you said, like the constant work with it, like everyday meditation, everyday breath work is called pranayama in Sanskrit. Um, like that will eventually lead you to kind of live in like a meditative state almost. And therefore you just really won't experience anxiety that much. And if you do, you know how to get out of it. And there's multiple different like breathing techniques that help with anxiety and calming and cooling the body, heating the body, all that. And I mean, it's not taught because it's we're in a Western country, you know, and that's very much so like an Eastern Asian culture thing. But if it was taught, I bet the numbers would decrease significantly on people experiencing anxiety, or maybe the statistic with coping mechanisms. Because I know we're going to talk about that, but anxiety just really leads to people finding anything that works to get rid of it because it's
Yeah.
really like that gut wrenching feeling
Yeah.
that does not go away. And it's just like it starts to really hinder you. It prevents you from sleeping, eating. I know when I'm
Eating,
having terrible anxiety, my
I will
appetite
not
is
eat.
exactly,
Like
and
you will lose weight, and that's why I say it's
it's so
physical.
bad.
Like
It's
it
a
really
disease.
affects your body in ways that you would not imagine. Anxiety can really take a toll on you. And that gut wrenching feeling is literally the
It's
worst feeling.
horrible. And it's like anxiety increases stress. If you're stressed and having anxiety, like you that's pretty bad. That's really gonna mesh with your health and your mental and everything. It's gonna throw off your whole pattern. And
Hmm.
it's it just leads to like, you know, like I said, doing anything to make it go away. And instead of turning to drugs, alcohol, keeping yourself busy, an addiction to like being busy, I think is really a thing with people with
Oh,
anxiety.
definitely.
And so, but really, all you have to do sometimes, and doesn't work for everybody, but journal, you know, take a few breaths, go meditate, do a few like yoga poses, like the alternatives, but they're just not taught, especially in the Black community.
I feel like what you said about being addicted to working and doing stuff is super big. And I think I feel like for me personally, like in high school, I was definitely an overachiever. Like I was in every club, I was getting A's in every class, I was
Per.
starting my own clubs, I was in every single sport. And that was just like one way of coping for me, like
Mm-hmm.
being in everything and never having a break. Because anytime I used to feel like anytime I wasn't doing something, I was doing something wrong. And it took me a long time to learn that it is okay to just have a break. Like it is okay to not be doing anything. Like I
It took me
would
a long time to learn that too.
always feel like I have to be doing something, and that's anxiety. Like
Yeah,
that's part
that
of
is
anxiety. That's a
pure
huge
anxiety.
part of anxiety. And
Mm-hmm.
finally being able to calm that down, it just feels like so much better because you'll stress yourself out even like when you're trying to relax, and
Mm-hmm.
that's sometimes the only time your body has to relax.
Mm-hmm.
So yoga has just been amazing because I feel like sometimes meditation is hard when you have anxiety, like when you're
Yeah.
really
It's hard to
going
calm the
through bad
thoughts.
anxiety is hard, but yoga, since you're moving your body as well and you
It's
have to really focus.
meditation in motion, the way I like to
Yeah,
see it.
exactly. Meditation in motion. Like, it gives you no choice but to just focus on
Mhm.
your body because
Mhm.
those
Exactly.
poses be hard.
Yes, and a huge thing I read in a lot of the papers for my final research project was on trauma and yoga, and it was saying how yoga can really help people who have experienced trauma because it helps them with body awareness. And
Mm-hmm.
when you're aware of your body, you can, when those triggers trigger you, you are aware of it immediately and know how to calm yourself. You know what it's like to feel calm, what it's like to live without it. And that's a huge thing for me. Like when I first started experiencing anxiety and having anxiety attacks, my mom, so amazing of her, put me in therapy. And a huge thing that's always been a theme of my life after I first had therapy was, now that I know what it's like to live without it, I don't ever want to live with it again. But when I do, I know how to get rid of it
Exactly.
because I had the resources. I'm blessed enough to have the resources to learn that stuff. But I just feel like once people learn life without anxiety, without depression, life changes forever. And but some people never know that. And when you were saying that right now about always having to like do something, like that took me a long time to unlearn. But personally, I feel like that was the case for me because my mom suffers from anxiety. And so she was always doing something and kind of always had me in something growing up. Like it was always like dance rehearsal, Girl Scout meeting, other event,
Yeah.
sleep, wake up, church. Like it was always just something. And it rubbed off on me, I feel. But so I just feel like it was automatic for me and it was like a learned anxiety trait for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because anxiety can be genetic or inherited, I would say. Maybe not genetic, but
Mm-hmm. But it also has so much to do with your environment as well.
yes, environment is everything.
Environment is huge, especially when it comes to mental health, because a lot of mental health um, disorders, you can have a gene for it, but many of them are caused by your environment. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you will get them due to your environment. Two twin brothers and sisters that are in different places could have the same genetics, and one gets a mental health disorder
Yeah.
and the other
Yeah.
doesn't. And trauma can trigger mental health
Mm-hmm.
disorders like that. So,
And that's a huge reason why it's so big in the Black community. It's just like, I just truly feel like people lack the knowledge. Like, people just don't know what anxiety is. Like,
mm-hmm.
us, for example, like, we never knew till we, I don't know, shoot, went to therapy, got the resources. Like,
Yeah,
but typically in the Black community, because the stigma is so bad around mental health, ain't nobody going to therapy. So, and don't nobody want to pay for therapy.
exactly.
And
That's the
it's
main complaint. I'm not going to pay someone to
to
talk.
talk. But it's so much more than just talking. But you know, when if you don't know, like, oh, this is anxiety I'm experiencing, I should seek help. Why seek help? You
Yeah,
know?
but I think it's important to note that there's a reason, another reason why like therapy is also stigmatized in the Black community is because they say like they don't want to pay to talk to a white person, and this is true. Like, research shows
Valid.
that
I don't
people
either.
are more likely to stay in therapy if they're matched with someone with the same racial or ethnic
Mm-hmm.
background. But there's 4% of psychologists in the United States that are Black.
That's insane.
2% of psychiatrists in the United States are Black. So it's actually really hard to find those
I
resources.
almost wish I stayed on the pre med track to change that
It's like really
statistic.
horrible. So
That's sad.
it's hard. That's why it's so hard to find these resources. And I think especially when we're talking about like low income communities and violent communities, the stuff that these kids are going through, a white therapist is not going to be able to help them and understand their situation. Like, in some situations, you really need a Black therapist or a therapist that gets what you're going through. Like,
Mm-hmm.
a kid that is growing up in Chicago is not going to relate to a doctor that's had privilege their whole life
Mm-hmm.
and has no idea what that's like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is where the disconnect is in
Mm-hmm.
Black mental health. Even
Mm-hmm.
if we have these resources
It's not
available
us
to us, it's
advocating.
not for us. It's
Yeah.
still not for us. It's for privileged people still.
Exactly. Privileged people, even if it is for us, they make it for the privileged ones, I
Yeah.
feel. And um what was I gonna, oh, I feel like I didn't really build a connection with my therapist till I found a black therapist, like a black female therapist. Like that honestly changed the game for me, because just even the way I like talk with her is different. The way I like just say everything, like I feel comfortable. And you're not going to talk or open up or get to no type of end result if you don't feel comfortable, you know?
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like people are just so like desperate for the help that they just settle for whatever. But like when it comes to your mental, you can't just settle. And it's like, even with like coping mechanisms, like you can't just settle for like the drugs or whatever the case may be. Like you really have to put the work in when it comes to your mental health, just like you have to do with your physical health. Like you want a good
Yeah.
body, you got to put the work in. And people just don't see it that way, I don't think, because people don't think of mental health like a part of their health, I feel.
Yeah.
They just, I don't know. I think sometimes people are aware, but they just don't understand what it is they're experiencing. Or like, like I'm saying, they just don't know what anxiety is. They don't know that they're depressed. They just think it's normal because they grew up around it so much, or their environment was like that for so long. So they're just living in a state of like trauma,
Yeah.
or they're living in a state of panic, but they're just so like, it's so ingrained. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And especially I was talking about what anxiety is, and it's the dysregulation of your fight or flight response. But imagine growing up in a community where you have to worry about if you're going to be
Your
in
life
the
is
right,
fight or flight.
exactly, if you're going to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. It's like, of course you're constantly going to be in the state of fight or flight. You're going to have constant anxiety because anything could happen every single day. And I think that's another reason why a lot of people aren't getting diagnosed with anxiety and aren't getting treated for anxiety in the Black community, because this is the reality of what people still have to face every single day.
Yeah.
And it's not just one person in a family, it's every single person.
Yeah.
Because the wrong place at the wrong time could mean
Applies
the
to
end of your
anybody.
life.
Mm-hmm.
And this, like, studies have shown that this causes you to constantly be in fight or flight
Mm-hmm.
at different points in the day, and it's something that you can no longer control. And this literally takes years off of our lives. Like,
Yeah.
Black people
Yeah.
have a shorter lifespan in this country, and this is one of the reasons.
Mm-hmm. I was gonna say earlier when you talked about the amygdala, because actually countless studies have proven that meditation, specifically breath work, completely regulates the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, which is what controls the fight or flight response.
Mm-hmm.
It's really for stress, like it controls like when you're in a stressful situation,
Yeah.
but that immediately contributes to anxiety, because stress is very anxiety inducing and vice versa. And a lot of the times it be PTSD, post traumatic stress, that causes the anxiety for people who are, grew up in environments like that. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to just sit down and do some breath work, but like there are ways to go about it, and science has proven. And I know I've mentioned coping mechanisms, and I think in the Black community, especially, like medication is really looked down on when it comes to things like this, because it's like they on medication, they crazy, like they had to go get help, like something's not right with their head, like it's so looked down on. But sometimes it's just like that's the only thing that is gonna help.
Yeah.
And until you learn how to regulate your body and come to your senses, come to the present moment, like you have to do what helps, but healthily.
Yeah. Definitely. And the stigma around medication, I think, just overall is something in the mental health community.
Yeah.
And definitely in the Black community, but in mental health in general, I think there's this separation. People want to advocate for mental health, but then sometimes they're not advocating for taking meds. And I've even been like a victim of this. I know it
Yeah,
was
me
a
too.
really like, it's something I constantly have debated with my therapist about, is like taking anxiety meds or taking like mood stabilizer meds. And it's the stigma. And then also, like, I know some medications do become addictive, and like you can't function without them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's another battle as well. But there is definitely a stigma there.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to talk about specifically what um the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement did for the Black community and how it affected us as far as anxiety and depression, because obviously police brutality has been a thing since the end of slavery and during slavery. But I think these videos and watching people die,
Yeah.
research has shown that it can give you PTSD, and I think this is affecting our anxiety as well. Like, I know when a cop is behind me or by my car, like, I will have a panic attack. It's been a point where like a cop was behind my car and I was driving, and like my leg was shaking and I almost couldn't drive. So I think just these factors that other people literally do not have to think about is making our mental health worse. And one study showed that signs of anxiety and depression jumped to 41% after the George Floyd death.
Wow.
In the Black community. And I think a key point in this study was signs of anxiety and depression, because if you give a group of Black people a survey that shows all the symptoms of anxiety and depression, a lot of us likely are experiencing these symptoms, but we're, like you said, we're not diagnosed with it. And that's why sometimes I hate statistics where it's like, oh, like 5% of these people have this mental health disorder, because the stigma around it is another factor of why people aren't saying they have this mental health disorder. True. But I think I like the surveys that say like signs of anxiety or depression, because I feel like it's more accurate.
And I feel like we're calling anxiety like a disease, but it's not like to be a negative connotation. It's just like if you don't treat it, like it can fester and manifest into something worse. And I feel like even having signs of anxiety is the same thing as having anxiety, because these signs aren't like normal states. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, that gut wrenching feeling. I'm trying to think how I really know I'm like anxious, but it's really like that feeling and like
your stomach.
Yeah, and just like not being able to focus. And like last semester I started to have test anxiety really, really bad. And it caused me to kind of like be anxious all the time, because I was just constantly worrying about like my next exam that I was probably going to fail, because my test anxiety is causing me to forget everything as soon as I get in front of the paper. And that's such a huge thing with kids. I'm not even gonna say especially in the Black community. I'm just gonna say in general. Like, you know, I've had that for as long as I can remember, but I just never knew what it was. And like specific tests, like time tests, give me really horrible test anxiety. And it took me like all of last semester and the beginning of this semester to really like figure out what works for me and to not experience it anymore. And it I was going through a lot just trying to like tame it. Like I tried out medication, which actually helped me so much, but I got off it because I don't want to be dependent on it. But that and having to meditate, having to do exercises before the exam, after the exam, like it was a whole lot. And really, it was kind of crazy, because the thing that changed it all was just like being present and not letting like the past depict the future. And I think when you're in a state of like anxiety all of the time and don't really know what it is, it's just impossible to get rid of, because you're constantly fearful of like what's going to happen again, or it happening again, or being in a situation where you freeze, or you like, you know what I'm saying? Like you forget like the test. And it just takes really getting out your head. But like you said, when you're anxious, like it's hard to do that. And that's why I just feel like everyone is so different when it comes to anxiety. We all experience it. It's not like something like, oh, you have the disease. Like we all experience anxiety, whether it's major, minor, continuous, short lived, like everything produces anxiety. And it's not to say that all anxiety is bad. Sometimes anxiety is helpful. Like it it's shown in studies, like it has to be a perfect level of calmness and anxiety to perform your best. And I feel like it's not to be looked down upon, because sometimes it can be a motivator.
Yeah.
And I feel like that feeling of not wanting to feel anxiety motivates me every day to like be better, or like
yeah, definitely.
Like experiencing life without anxiety has motivated me to continue to like improve myself, because I'm just like, there's no other way to say it, but that stuff sucks. That shit sucks.
It really does suck. But I think, like, just knowing how much it sucks, one thing that I really like to practice in my meditation is, like, separating myself from my environment and not being attached to anything and not being attached to,
Yeah,
like,
attachment for
yeah,
sure.
attachment is a huge way that I got rid of my anxiety, because when I'm meditating, I like to, like, really detach from my situation and even from, like, parts of myself, and just really focus on my body. And I think that your anxiety is attached to your ego. Your anxiety is completely attached to this perception of what you think of yourself and what you, like, deem important and stuff. So meditation is, it can truly be an escape from everything. And I think that's why meditation and mindfulness healing in the Black community would be so powerful, because we of course are still facing discrimination, and we always, I'm not going to say we always will because I have hope, but as of right now we are facing discrimination, and especially for children that are not able to feel safe in their own communities, in their own homes. I think that being able to have that escape and just escape out of your situation and focus on your breath and focus on your body, not only can it be beneficial to them for their mental health, but it's also just beneficial for them in their everyday scenario,
life, yeah.
everyday life. And that's why I feel like that's, like, one of my callings for sure, is to work with children in meditation, because I've, as a babysitter, I've seen kids of privilege whose parents have them in daycares that are like Buddha daycares, where they do meditation and they do mindfulness, and you can see the difference in the kid. Like,
yeah,
it's just, at 3 years old, you can see a difference in this kid. And I think that this would just be a game changer for the Black community.
Me
And
too.
we really need to we have to do it ourselves. And that's the difference. We always have to do it ourselves, but I think it's worth it. Like, having that would definitely change. And I think it would have changed me as a kid for sure.
Oh, for sure. But I feel like the Black community in America is so disconnected from our roots. And if we would have never been torn apart from our roots the way we were, I feel that like our statistics in mental health would not be anywhere close to where they are, because you know, our ancestors were herbalists, our ancestors
Exactly.
were holistic healers, and it's like, that's not to say they didn't experience anxiety, but I'm sure it wasn't what it is now. And I feel like our anxiety, just being Black in America, is anxiety inducing.
Exactly.
And it should never be like that. You know what I'm saying?
Never.
And well, just being a minority, I feel like. And our people have overcome a lot in this last like century, but I feel like you said with George Floyd, the media is a whole new thing now. And seeing our people getting killed and them having no problem putting those videos on ABC News and the nightly news, like that's insane. Like that is giving PTSD to our people. And I feel like it's just a crazy world we're living in right now, but I think it is gonna have to be us that changes it. Like, that's why I want to have my own practice with Black therapists and do this type of therapy, because I just feel like our people need a new approach. Like,
Yeah.
our people can't, it's not working clearly to rely on therapists who aren't of our race, because they just don't get it. And we shouldn't have to censor ourselves when we're trying to be vulnerable. And also, there could be other like medications that are prescribed, I feel, and like, not to be all earthy and stuff, but there's herbs that'll help, and changing diet would even help. Changing environment would help significantly. Like, I know
environment is really everything, though.
yes, and it's like, in the Black community, I feel like it's almost looked down upon to like leave your community. Like it's bad to, you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, they too good for us now. But it's like, no, I just need a better environment. I want to live. And like you said, it's really proven that anxiety and stress takes years off of our life. And that is being in a environment that is just not healthy.
And I think if America and the United States ever truly wants to fix the cracks in its country, these programs that we're talking about that will help us, and programs that will help our communities in general and putting money into our communities, we should not have to go back and do this for ourselves. This is, we use the word crisis when we're talking about it. Black
It
mental
is a
health is a
crisis.
crisis. There's a crisis of Black jobs in our job placements. There's so many
Mm-hmm.
crises
Crises.
happening in the Black community, but no one sees it as a crisis because it's been happening for 400 years,
Literally.
and it's almost
It's conditioned.
expected by not only us, but it's expected by white people that if a Black person has a job and people are getting laid off, that Black people are getting laid off first. Or it's expected that we
Exactly.
live in this violent communities. It's expected that we're on the bottom, and that's why it's been okay for so long. But I think mental health is a crisis, labor is a crisis, and these are things that if the United States ever wants to fix the crisis, they need to put funding in, and they need to fix
Mm-hmm.
every single part of this
Mm-hmm.
because it's still happening.
I agree. And this the initiative, like I will say, like since COVID, I feel like the Black community has shed a lot of light on mental health and things are getting better. Like so many people have foundations now and like so many like celebrities are speaking out on it. And that's great. That's great, but it's like I don't know if we were watching or reading something, but it was saying like those people at the talk at UCLA, people in those communities feel like they don't have the resources.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when it comes down to like accessibility and like we having to do everything for us all the time, but we're going to have to be the ones to open these centers, these be the therapist for our people, like or just teach about it to our kids as they're growing up. Like I said, we both didn't know that we were experiencing anxiety when we were experiencing it at 16, 15 years old. But if we're taught that from a young age and the stigma is just not so stigmatized, then I feel like it would just be a complete game changer. Like accessibility and just knowledge. Like,
Knowledge is huge because I think it, like, us not having a knowledge of our history and not having a clear, like, actual knowledge of the media representation, that's a huge thing. I
mm-hmm,
think
mm-hmm,
in history we should definitely learn about how the media played a role in painting the picture of what a Black person is or what different communities are and how they really like feed into our brains. Like the news
mm-hmm,
is huge and
mm-hmm.
that should definitely be a part of history. But all of this feeds into our lack of knowledge about mental health because we just got a lack of knowledge in general. Like, how are we supposed to heal ourselves when there's generations of trauma in our family and we're not even getting the full picture of what has caused this? And we just think it's natural that our parents treat us this way or our mom is stressed because they work 3 jobs. Like, things like that are not natural, and there's things that cause that. And having a full understanding and knowledge of history and a knowledge of mental health and what's going on with ourselves, it's like our video on consciousness. Those two, a combination of knowledge of those two things is what allows you to heal yourself.
I was in like class, you know how now they be saying like our generation especially has the highest rates of anxiety and
Yeah.
depression. They relate it to the phones, but lately I've been thinking like, what if it's because of our parents? Like think about the era our parents grew up in, like 70s, 80s, war on drugs, mass incarceration, first time seeing real riots like LA riots, Rodney King, like a whole new target on the Black community and now the media. And I just feel like mental health is really like inherited and like passed down and can be genetic, but I truly feel that way about anxiety. Like it's a
Mm-hmm.
learned behavior, I think, almost, or like can be. And I feel like our parents are even suffering from it, but they just been living in it so long. It's like this is my normal life. Like,
Yeah.
and I see it now that I'm like older and educated on it. Like, yeah, my parents definitely like have anxiety, or I know my mom does because we've talked about it, but like the, just opening that conversation is like something that's not being done, and we're always trying to be like the strong black woman. We always have to be strong, but it's like sometimes we are not. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
like anxiety can make you feel very little. And I just feel like the conversation just needs to be brought up more, like in our houses when we're growing up. Like I just keep circling back. Like the lack of knowledge is just everything, and
Mm-hmm.
the stigma too. But really, the lack of knowledge, I feel.
Yeah, I always hear that too, that the anxiety and depression numbers are going up in our generation. But I think a huge thing about our generation as well is just that we definitely have less stigma around mental health than the previous
True.
generations. And I think we're more likely to seek out resources.
Yeah.
And even things like my college, like going to UCLA, I have UCLA health insurance, and that
Mhm.
provides
Mhm.
mental health
Mhm.
services. Like these are some things that our parents probably didn't have going to college, and that's what, like a 10-year difference, a 15-year difference, and they didn't have that. So it's just things like that. As little as that, accessibility is huge, knowledge is huge, and also our parents talking about it, because you're not going to want to talk about anxiety, want to go to therapists if it's not something you could talk about in your own house. And I think
Exactly.
growing up, there was like my parents were not the greatest about talking about mental health, and like it was very stigmatized and
Mhm.
it had a huge negative connotation in my household. But I think
Mhm.
that was a projection.
Mhm.
But that definitely affected my view. Like I would
Mhm.
never, I think I went to one therapy session my, like from my childhood all the way to high school, and I hated it. And it was because like I was always told, um if something, like if you have a mental health issue, or like, or you say something that's concerning, it's like, oh, you're crazy, I'm going to take you to the psych ward.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, I feel like, grow up with that experience.
Yeah.
But I think that's why it took me so long to get therapy, because even though I had mental health services at UCLA, I didn't reach out to actually use them until I was in the end of my sophomore year, or my third year, beginning of my third year. So that's still like 2 years of me not accessing services that I had access to, just
Mhm.
because of the stigma and because of the way I grew up and
Mhm.
the idea surrounding mental health. And I know people that went to college with me that could use mental health services as well, but they never used it their entire time there. And it's like, we don't know when we'll have access to that again.
It literally.
So, accessibility is another huge thing when it comes to that.
Yeah, and I just feel like a huge life mission of mine is just to try to make therapy as affordable as possible for our people because like I'm not even going to lie, therapy is
It's
expensive,
a
bro.
check.
Like it's a bill and a half, man. It is expensive. It's a lot just to even like open yourself up, find a therapist, find somebody you like, test it out, you know what I mean? Like build a relationship. You really don't be getting into the thick of therapy, I feel like, until 2, 3 months into having a therapist because you got to build.
A relationship
Yeah,
for
and
real.
it's just like it's a process, but it's worth it. And I just feel like it needs to be normalized almost. Like it doesn't work for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Therapy is not everybody's thing, and I can understand that. But I feel like that should be something that everybody tries out in their life because you never know what it could do for you.
Mm-hmm.
And you never know like the depths of your mind and your soul and yourself until you say it out loud
That's true.
or write it down. But until you're 100% honest with yourself, and this is a huge thing I wanted to say about anxiety that has helped me just overcome it is the acceptance of it. Like, first experiencing anxiety, it's like you run because it's like, I don't want to feel this. You find anything to cope with, like, yeah. And you just kind of in a panic mode because it's like, what is this feeling? What is this? But once you accept, like, I am struggling with anxiety, I have anxiety, I feel like that just opens the gate for you to seek help and want to
Mm-hmm.
be better. But so many people, because of the stigma, look down on it and don't accept that that's what they're experiencing, and it just leads to, you know, the continuous cycle of experiencing it. But we have to accept it. We have to accept that we all experience it, that it's a reality, and that it happens to everybody.
Yeah, and I think like there's also ways to suppress your anxiety that aren't meditation, that aren't therapy. Like, for example, self medicating. And like, for me, smoking weed my freshman year is something that helped my anxiety a lot, but that's a temporary fix. And
Yeah.
overall, it just made my anxiety worse because I didn't have any
Mhm.
healthy coping
Mhm.
mechanisms. So when I didn't have that there, it's like, I don't know what to do
Mhm.
now that I have anxiety.
Mhm.
So
I feel that. Same.
being able to like have an instant fix, it feels good in the moment, but I think like looking back on it, I would advise anyone, especially young people,
Don't do
to
it.
deal with it
Yeah.
first, deal with it
Yeah.
within yourself,
Yeah.
because that is just going to postpone your healing and
Mhm.
postpone you actually working
Mhm.
on finding healthy coping mechanisms that help you with your anxiety.
We got to heal, not find temporary relief. And I think when you have a lack of resources or lack of accessibility, it's all about temporary
Temporary.
relief. And that just becomes an unhealthy cycle. And that's just what I want to see for our community, like
Mm-hmm.
the healthy coping mechanisms, because we still have the highest rates of violence and drug abuse and all that. And I'm not saying it's all attributed to anxiety, but I'm definitely saying that it is something we to go to because it's something we know, and we don't think about the healthiness. We don't think about, I'm gonna go to therapy. It's like, nah, I'm gonna smoke this joint right now.
And
Like,
that's a money thing too. Like that's another aspect. Like therapy's $140. A joint
it's
is
$10, right?
five if you get it from someone. Like
Yeah,
I don't know.
exactly.
Like you
Exactly.
have to think about the options, and also there's a reason why that's the option. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely a reason why that's the option.
Mm-hmm. And just like I said, acceptance and knowing like you're not weak for having anxiety. You're not mentally ill for having anxiety. You're not different from anybody else. You're just experiencing something as a result of your life experiences. And sometimes we don't ask for that. You know what I mean? We
Mm-hmm.
don't ask to grow up in an environment that has me in fight or flight mode all the time. Like, and sometimes that could be a lot, but it's just the acceptance. Like, this is just, I feel like, this is where God has me, and it's my duty now to overcome it. And
Mm-hmm.
it takes work, and it's not going to be easy, but it's better than prolonging it by putting off the healing.
It is, and I want to say that there's definitely different ways of healing than the three that we always well, four I would say that we always mention, which is meditation, yoga, therapy, and
Journaling, probably.
journaling. Yes. Those are like often the things that we post about in our action items, but I think we as black people can also go outside the box when it comes to our healing, and we could come up with something different for ourselves, because I mean it's just very
Hmm.
westernized treatment, other than like yoga's Eastern
Hmm.
Asian, but I think that there's definitely different ways of healing that we could come up with. And
There's a lot of holistic ways. I was actually
yeah.
watching an interview on this holistic healer lady. She's pretty famous, but she was just spitting out a whole bunch of facts and just about the black community really, and just all these ways that we can overcome it with just natural things and just changing our way of life, like
Hmm.
changing our lifestyle, going back to eating how our ancestors used to, like just eating healthy, building healthy habits. Like, that's not often talked about because it's so much survival, I
Hmm.
feel like, in the black community, and worrying about who's out to get us and having our head on a swivel all the time. It doesn't matter who you are. Like, I just feel like being black in America is having a target on your back. But if we can build the healthy habits in our home, if we can establish, like in our childhood, the healthiness, and that's why, like, it's our generation for real, because we're going to be the ones with the next raising our kids to hopefully be better than us, than our parents. And we have to learn now, like, we have to heal ourselves for the next generation, I
We
feel,
really do.
because really it is no hope if we don't, especially the way media is going and phones are taking over. Like, our nieces and your little brother, like on a tablet at 2 years old, like, not to, it's just things like that we have to really install in them, also the healthiness just as much, because it is on a windy path downward, I feel, in the
Mm-hmm.
future. But yeah, I think it just takes us taking the initiative and trying to overcome. We're seeing it the most, so we gotta apply the most.
Yeah, and I think we're at a point where we have so much opportunity.
So many
I always
resources.
say, like, our ancestors, just even thinking back to the civil rights movement, did so much more with so much less. Like, they organized
Honestly.
so many things with so much less. And I think it's important and it's often left out of history. But throughout the history of the United States, no matter what state Black people were in, there was always a history of organizing and people coming together and building
Coming
community
together
and
as the
fighting against
one.
the conditions that they were in. And it's important for our generation to do that, but it's especially important for young people to do that because the Black youth have played the largest role in organizing, the largest role in healing and bringing people together. It's always the youth that bring people together.
Hmm.
When Angela Davis was doing her first sit and she was 16, 17 years old, like, the youth just play this very strong role. So definitely as parents it's important, but right now I think it's important
Yeah.
more than ever for us to use our voice and voice what we want to see
Hmm.
for when we're adults and when we have kids, because we can make the change and we have the
Hmm.
power to change the stuff that we don't like to see.
We have so many resources at our fingertips, I feel
Literally.
now. And even with therapy, there's a lot of therapy resources out there. Maybe they're not like A1, but they're out there, and insurance is starting to cover therapy, which is like revolutionary in my opinion. So it's just advocation,
Yeah. My therapy is free with my insurance, so
period.
I think yeah, just spreading the knowledge, and that's
Hmm.
like the main reason we have this podcast is just
Yes, opening the conversation.
opening the conversation. Like, if nobody's going to talk about it, no, we will.
Right. And as much as we struggled with it, I feel like, we could have said a lot on this episode about anxiety, but it's almost just like a part of my life now.
Yeah,
I
it's
feel
like
it's kind of hard to just talk about it because it's like, it's a part of my life.
yeah, and I think for me personally, when I'm learning about how to deal with what I'm struggling with, what helps me more than anything is learning from people that have been through it and people that experienced it, because they can give you that real life feeling and they felt how you felt.
Hmm.
And I think that's what we try to emphasize
It's just
today
talking.
is our experience. Because, I mean, especially for Black people and minorities, reading about anxiety, it's even from the white perspective. All these studies are usually done on white people. So I think we can learn from each other more than anything, and
Definitely.
we can learn how to heal each other and from our ancestors and our parents and our grandparents, because they organize in their time and they search for healing in their time too. So
Hmm. I think talking and saying it out loud is step 1 through 3, out of 10 of recovering and getting better and healing. And that is why we have this space, because we are alone together. So I hope y'all, like, we really opened the conversation on anxiety, mental health, and the Black community for real this episode, but that's exactly what we wanted to do. And I just think that we're going to do that this whole month on our
mhm.
social media and the podcast episodes, because it's time to just open that conversation and
Yeah.
spread the
It's
awareness.
that time, and we encourage you to talk about what you're going through as well and start opening these conversations within your circle and within your own life, because it can be a way to get healing as well.
Mm-hmm.
Just having that conversation,
Mm-hmm.
it could do more for you than you would ever know.
Mm-hmm. Don't be afraid of the stigma, y'all. Let's end it. So make sure y'all like, comment, subscribe, follow our social media. The link will be in the subscription box. And stay tuned for more Mental Health Awareness Month.
Thank
Thanks.
you.